Hunter Reynolds slammed his fist on the table and laughed. Right there, in the middle of the courtroom. His wife Leora flinched like he'd hit her. The judge hadn't even finished speaking, but Hunter was already standing, buttoning his Italian jacket, ready to walk out a free man with every penny of his fortune intact. He'd won. He'd destroyed her. And he wanted her to see him smile while she cried. But then the oak doors behind him groaned open, and Hunter Reynolds had no idea his celebration was about to become his funeral. If you want to see justice satisfying served, subscribe now and stay until the satisfying end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you how one arrogant man lost everything in a single afternoon. The day Hunter Reynolds won everything. The gavel hadn't touched wood yet, and Hunter Reynolds was already tasting champagne. He leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, letting the courtroom lights catch the platinum face of his watch. Subtle. Expensive. A reminder to everyone in that room, especially the woman sitting 20 feet away, that he was untouchable. Relax, his lawyer whispered. We've got them cornered. Donovan Price didn't look up from his papers. He was stacking documents with the smooth efficiency of a Vegas dealer clearing a table. $1,000 an hour, that's what Donovan cost, worth every penny. Hunter chuckled low. I'm not worried, Don. I'm enjoying the view. He nodded toward the plaintiff's table. Leora sat there, small, hunched, wearing a gray dress that looked like she'd pulled it off a department store rack. Her dark hair was yanked back in a tight bun. Her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to disappear. 5 years ago, she'd walked down the aisle in Vera Wang. Now she looked like a woman waiting for a bus that would never come. Hunter felt satisfaction rise in his chest like warm whiskey. This was what happened when you crossed him. Mr. Reynolds. Judge O'Malley's voice cut through the room. He was a stern man, face like crumpled paper, known for hating anyone who wasted his time. Your counsel has moved to dismiss the spousal support request based on evidence of infidelity. Is that correct? Donovan stood, smoothing his jacket. Yes, Your Honor. We've submitted documentation. Ms. Reynolds' visits to the Hotel Del Luna are well documented. Timestamps, photographs, digital records. Hunter watched Leora's shoulders drop another inch. It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, expensive lie. $20,000 to a private investigator who knew how to doctor photos and manufacture digital trails that never existed. Leora hadn't cheated. She'd been painfully, stupidly loyal, even while Hunter was sleeping with his executive assistant 3 nights a week. But truth didn't matter in court. Only evidence mattered, and Hunter could manufacture whatever evidence he needed. Leora's lawyer stood up. Sarah Jenkins, court appointed. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week, clutching a folder that was half the thickness of Donovan's smallest binder. Objection, Your Honor. My client denies these allegations. The photographs are grainy and inconclusive. This is clearly a smear campaign designed to... Ms. Jenkins. Judge O'Malley rubbed his temples. The timestamps verify location data. Unless you have substantial evidence to counter the digital forensics, I'm inclined to accept what's been presented. Sarah Jenkins sat down slowly. Leora didn't look up. She was staring at her hands, twisting a plain silver ring around her finger. Not her wedding ring. She'd taken that off months ago. Hunter leaned toward Donovan. She's not even fighting back. It's pathetic. It's over, Donovan whispered. Watch this. Judge O'Malley shuffled papers. In light of the evidence presented, and given the plaintiff's lack of employment history during the marriage, the court is prepared to uphold the prenuptial agreement in its entirety. Hunter's heart rate quickened. Mr. Reynolds will retain full ownership of Reynolds Tech, the marital residence, and all liquid assets. Ms. Reynolds will receive the agreed-upon severance of $20,000 and will vacate the premises within 48 hours. $20,000. It wouldn't cover a year of rent in this city. Hunter had spent more than that on a watch last month. He looked at Leora, willing her to meet his eyes. He wanted to see the tears, the realization the understanding that she was nothing without him. But Leora just kept twisting that silver ring. "Is there anything else before I issue the final decree?" Judge O'Malley glanced at the clock. 11:55 a.m. The man wanted his lunch. "No, Your Honor," Donovan said smoothly. Actually," Sarah Jenkins stammered, "we request a continuance to review the financial documents again. There are discrepancies we haven't had time to—" "Denied." O'Malley's voice was sharp. "You've had 6 months, Ms. Jenkins. I'm ruling now." Hunter tapped his pen against the table. Tap, tap, tap. Victory rhythm. He was already planning the celebration. Tiffany was waiting in his car outside. They'd fly to Cabo tonight. Champagne on the plane. He'd send Leora one photo, just one of himself on the beach with a woman half her age. A final goodbye. "Very well." Judge O'Malley raised his gavel. "In the matter of Reynolds versus Reynolds, I find in favor of the defendant, Hunter Reynolds. The divorce is granted, and the division of—" The doors at the back of the courtroom didn't open. They exploded. The heavy oak panels swung inward with enough force to make the hinges scream. The sound shattered the murmur of the room. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. The bailiff's hand moved toward his hip. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway. He was old, late 60s maybe. But he stood like a general surveying a battlefield. His suit was charcoal cut from fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He held a cane not for support, but like a weapon. Polished black wood, silver wolf's head handle. But it was his face that stopped the room. Hard, weathered. Eyes like chips of flint that swept the courtroom with terrifying precision. Behind him stood 2 more men in dark suits carrying briefcases that looked less like legal documents and more like ammunition. "Who the hell is that?" Hunter whispered. Security should have stopped him. Donovan didn't answer. Hunter glanced at his lawyer and felt his stomach drop. Donovan Price, the shark, the killer. The man who'd never lost a case in 15 years had gone white as bone. His hands were trembling. "Don, who is it?" "Quiet." Donovan's voice cracked. That's not possible." Judge O'Malley had frozen. His gavel hung in midair. His mouth opened, then closed. When he spoke, the boom was gone from his voice, replaced by something Hunter had never heard from a judge before. Fear. Mr. Thorpe." The old man didn't answer immediately. He walked down the center aisle. His cane struck the carpet with each step. Thud. 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 Like a heartbeat. Like a countdown. He didn't look at Hunter. Didn't look at the judge. He walked straight to the plaintiff's table. Straight to Leora. For the first time all morning, Leora looked up. Her expression wasn't fear. Wasn't relief. It was something complicated. Shame mixed with resignation. Like a child caught hiding a wound. She stood slowly. "Hello, Papa." The words hit Hunter like a physical blow. Papa. He knew Leora's father. He'd met the man once at the wedding. A quiet, boring man who said he worked as an archivist for some library in Chicago. He'd worn a rented tuxedo that didn't fit and left early without saying goodbye. Hunter had dismissed him as a nobody. A small man from nowhere with nothing to offer. But the man standing in this courtroom was not an archivist. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Leora." His voice was deep gravelly, and it carried to every corner without him raising it. "You didn't call me." "I wanted to handle it myself." "And how's that going?" Magnus Thorpe gestured with his cane, taking in the room. The smug husband. The expensive lawyer. The trembling judge. "Seems like you're about to be thrown to the wolves, my dear." He paused. "Fortunately, the wolves work for me." Hunter couldn't stay silent. This was ridiculous. Some old man crashing a legal proceeding like he owned the place. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Excuse me." I don't know who you think you are, but this is a closed session. Judge, I demand this man be removed immediately. Donovan grabbed his sleeve and yanked him down hard. Sit down, Donovan hissed. Sweat was beading on his forehead. Sit down, you idiot. What no? Hunter pulled away. Who is this guy? Leora's dad is a librarian. Magnus Thorpe turned. His eyes found Hunter. It felt like being pinned to a board, like being examined under a microscope. There was no anger in those eyes, just cold clinical assessment. A butcher examining meat. A librarian, Magnus repeated. The corner of his mouth twitched. Yes, I suppose that's what I told you. I do enjoy keeping records. He took one step closer. I keep very, very detailed records, Mr. Reynolds. Magnus turned to the judge. Judge O'Malley. It's been a long time. The 1998 corruption trials, I believe. You were a junior prosecutor then. Nervous. Eager to please. O'Malley swallowed hard. Mr. Thorpe, I wasn't aware you were related to the plaintiff. The name Reynolds. Magnus said it like it was something foul on his tongue. She took his name. A mistake we're here to correct. He gestured to the two men behind him. They stepped forward, placing their briefcases on Leora's table with heavy thunks. Sarah Jenkins, the public defender, looked like she might faint. One of the men leaned over and whispered something to her, pressing a check into her hand. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed her bag and practically ran out of the courtroom. This is highly irregular. Hunter was on his feet again. You can't just swap lawyers in the middle of a verdict. Judge, tell him. I can. Magnus didn't raise his voice. And I just did. Hunter looked to Judge O'Malley for support. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Reynolds, given the unique circumstances and the presence of Mr. Thorpe, I'm granting a recess. 1 hour. A recess. Hunter's voice cracked. You were about to rule. You were about to give me everything. 1 hour. O'Malley banged the gavel and practically fled to his chambers. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Hunter grabbed Donovan's arm. What the hell is happening? Who is he? Donovan was already packing his briefcase, hands shaking so badly he dropped a pen twice. You told me her family was nobody, Hunter. You told me she came from nothing. She did. Her dad worked at a library in Chicago. I checked. Donovan stopped. He looked at Hunter with something close to pity. Magnus Thorpe didn't work at a library. He owned the library and the land it sat on, and the construction company that built it. Donovan leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Hunter Magnus Thorpe isn't a librarian. He was the lead prosecutor for the Southern District for 20 years before he went private. He's the man who brought down the Valetti crime family, exposed 3 sitting senators, put away more corrupt executives than anyone in American history. Hunter's mouth went dry. They call him the gavel. He's not just a lawyer, Hunter. Donovan grabbed his briefcase. He's a legal Grim Reaper, and he retired 10 years ago, disappeared completely. Everyone assumed he was dead. Hunter looked across the aisle. Magnus was standing over Leora, one hand on her shoulder, speaking softly. His 2 associates were unpacking files, thick binders that looked ominous as coffins. So, he was a prosecutor. Hunter scoffed, trying to recover. So what? He's old. He's retired. The law is the law. We have the prenup. We have the evidence of her cheating. Donovan shook his head slowly. You don't get it. Men like Magnus Thorpe don't enter a courtroom unless they already know the outcome. He didn't come here to argue the case, Hunter. Donovan headed for the door. He came here to bury you. Hunter stood alone at the defense table. Across the room, Magnus Thorpe looked up and caught his stare. The old man didn't blink. Slowly, deliberately, he raised one finger to his lips. Silence. Then Magnus smiled. It was the worst smile Hunter had ever seen. Cold, patient, hungry. The smile of a man who had already won. Hunter reached for his phone, his hands trembling. He texted Tiffany, slight delay. Old relative showed up. Annoying, but harmless. Order another bottle of Dom. He had no idea that the phone in his hand was already compromised. He had no idea that the harmless old relative had spent the last 48 hours dismantling his entire life. Brick by digital brick. The battle hadn't just begun. It was already over. Hunter Reynolds was simply the last person to know. The hour felt like 5 minutes to Hunter Reynolds. When they filed back into the courtroom, something had changed. He could feel it in the air, thick charged electric. Like the static before a tornado touches down. Magnus Thorpe sat at the plaintiff's table, with his hands resting flat on the polished wood. He wasn't looking at notes. Wasn't conferring with his associates. He was staring straight at Hunter with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. Hunter tugged at his collar. When had it gotten so hot in here? Judge O'Malley returned to the bench looking like a different man. Gone was the bored bureaucrat counting minutes until lunch. His eyes were sharp now. Alert. He'd made phone calls during that recess. He knew exactly who was sitting in his courtroom. "We're back on the record," O'Malley said. "Mr. Thorpe, you indicated you have new evidence regarding the infidelity allegations." Magnus rose slowly. He didn't approach the bench. He didn't need to. His voice filled every corner of the room without effort. "I do, Your Honor. My client, my daughter, was accused of adultery based on photographs allegedly taken at the Hotel Del Luna on October 14th and 15th. "The evidence is conclusive," Hunter blurted out before he could stop himself. "We have timestamps. We have—" Donovan kicked him hard under the table. Magnus turned his head slowly, like a tank turret finding its target. "Mr. Reynolds. Impatient. I remember being young and foolish once." He paused. "It's a dangerous combination." Magnus snapped his fingers. One of his associates stood and handed a thick folder to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge like it contained plutonium. "Your Honor, the photographs submitted by Mr. Reynolds were taken by a private investigator named Carl Hutchins. Mr. Hutchins is currently sitting in the hallway outside this courtroom, sweating through his cheap suit because he knows he's about to lose his license." Hunter's stomach lurched. "But we don't need his testimony," Magnus continued. "We have something better. We have physics." Physics. Hunter couldn't help the scoff that escaped his lips. Magnus ignored him. "The photos show my daughter entering room 402. The timestamp reads 8:42 p.m. Magnus clasped his hands behind his back. "However, if you examine Exhibit A in the folder I just provided, you'll find a receipt from a gas station in Santa Monica, time-stamped 8:45 p.m., the same night." Hunter felt the blood drain from his face. "The credit card used belonged to Leora. The signature is Leora's, and the security footage which I've included on the flash drive shows my daughter purchasing a Gatorade and a bag of pretzels at that exact time." Magnus paused, letting the silence stretch until it hurt. "Now, unless my daughter has discovered the ability to teleport across 40 miles of Los Angeles traffic in 3 minutes, the photographs submitted by the defense are fabrications." Donovan was flipping frantically through his own copies, sweat staining his collar. "Your Honor, we relied on the investigator's report in good faith. We had no reason to believe—" "Good faith." Magnus laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "Mr. Price, you're a senior partner at one of the most prestigious firms in California. You know better than to submit evidence without proper verification. Unless, of course, you were instructed to ignore the discrepancies." Magnus looked directly at Hunter. "By your client." "I didn't know." Hunter shouted, panic clawing at his throat. "The PI must have messed up the dates. It was his mistake, not mine." "The PI didn't make a mistake." Magnus took 3 steps toward Hunter's table. He was paid an additional $5,000 in cash to enhance the narrative. "We have the bank transfer records, Hunter, from your personal slush fund. The one you thought was untraceable because you named it consulting fees. The room went dead silent. Hunter looked at Donovan for help. Donovan was staring at the table, refusing to meet his eyes. So, Magnus turned back to Judge O'Malley. The allegation of infidelity against my daughter is demonstrably false. It is perjury. It is fraud upon this court, and it is malicious. Agreed. Judge O'Malley's voice had turned to ice. He looked at Hunter like he was examining something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. The evidence of Ms. Reynolds' alleged infidelity is stricken from the record. The motion to deny spousal support based on this evidence is denied. Hunter's head was spinning. This couldn't be happening. He'd planned everything so carefully. But that's not all, Magnus said. He wasn't done. He was just getting started. Since we're discussing infidelity, and since the prenuptial agreement contains a moral turpitude clause, a clumsy copy of a contract I wrote myself in 1985, by the way, I think we should examine the defendant's activities. Donovan stood up, grasping at straws. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. My client's private life isn't on trial here. It is if it affects the division of assets, Magnus interrupted smoothly. And it does, because Mr. Reynolds didn't just spend money on dinner dates. He spent marital assets, significant ones. Another snap of his fingers. Another folder. Tiffany Miller. Magnus read the name slowly, letting each syllable land like a hammer blow. Executive assistant, 24 years old. Currently waiting in Mr. Reynolds's car in the parking garage downstairs, I believe. Hunter felt his throat close. A Mercedes C-Class leased in Hunter Reynolds' name. An apartment in Marina del Rey, rent paid through a shell company owned by Hunter Reynolds. And most interesting of all, Magnus flipped a page. A tuition payment to the Fashion Institute of Design. Made 2 weeks ago. Leora made a small sound. Almost inaudible. But Hunter heard it. He couldn't look at her. This is irrelevant to the proceedings. Donovan tried, but his voice had no strength left. Irrelevant. Magnus's voice suddenly filled the room like thunder. He used the joint savings account, the account that belonged to both of them. He stole from his wife to pay for his mistress. Magnus pulled another document from the folder. That voids the asset protection clause of the prenup, Your Honor. Paragraph 14, Section B. Dissipation of marital assets for extramarital purposes renders the separation of property null and void. Judge O'Malley was flipping through the documents, his face growing darker with each page. Mr. Reynolds? The judge's voice was sharp as a blade. Is this true? Did you use the joint account for these expenses? I put that money in there. Hunter was stammering now, his composure shattered. It was my earnings, my work. I had every right to. It was a joint account. O'Malley cut him off. Legally, that money belonged to both of you equally. You effectively embezzled from your wife to fund an affair. The word hung in the air. Embezzled. It sounded criminal. It sounded like prison. Leora slowly raised her head for the first time since the session resumed. She looked at Hunter. Her eyes weren't filled with tears anymore. They were clear, steady, and in them Hunter saw something that terrified him more than Magnus ever could. Recognition, like she was finally seeing him for exactly what he was. I knew about the car, she said quietly. Hunter froze. What? The Mercedes. Leora's voice grew stronger with each word. I saw the bank statement months ago. I knew you were paying for it. I knew who it was for. Then why didn't you? Because I thought if I just tried harder, you'd come back. She wiped a single tear from her cheek. I thought if I was a better wife, a quieter wife, you'd remember why you married me. I was so stupid. No, my dear. Magnus placed a hand on her shoulder. You were loyal. You were loving. He turned his flinty gaze back to Hunter. He was stupid. Magnus walked back to his table and picked up another folder. This one was thicker than the others. Now, about the prenuptial agreement. The prenup is valid, Hunter said desperately. It was signed by both parties, witnessed, notarized. You can't just... The prenup is dead, Hunter. Magnus opened the folder. You killed it, which means we're now operating under California community property law. 50-50 split, right down the middle. Hunter gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. Fine. He hissed through clenched teeth. Fine. Give her half the house, half the cars, half the cash in the bank. I don't care. He forced himself to smile. It felt like cracking glass. I still have the company. Reynolds Tech is in a protected trust, completely separate from marital assets. You can take the furniture, Leora, but the business is mine. That's my legacy. That's untouchable. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Magnus Thorpe did something unexpected. He sighed. Not in frustration, in something that almost looked like pity. Oh, Hunter, he said softly. You really should have done your homework on who I am. He turned to his associates and nodded. One of them powered on the large television screen mounted on the courtroom wall. The other began connecting a laptop. Your Honor, if I may present additional evidence regarding the ownership structure of Reynolds Tech. Proceed, Judge O'Malley said, leaning forward with obvious interest. The screen flickered to life. A complex flowchart appeared. Boxes connected by arrows, company names Hunter didn't recognize feeding into names he did. This? Magnus used his cane to point at the top box, is Reynolds Tech. Market value approximately $50 million. It's held by the Reynolds Living Trust established 3 years ago to protect intellectual property and stock options from unforeseen liabilities. Like a divorce. Hunter said, a trace of smugness returning. My estate planners are the best in the business. Your estate planners are very good, Magnus agreed. But they're also lazy. They used a standard holding structure without examining the original capitalization. He clicked a button. The image changed. Reynolds Tech was founded 8 years ago. But you were broke then, Hunter. You had an idea for an app and maxed out credit cards. You couldn't afford office space, let alone developers. I got an angel investor. Hunter shifted in his seat. An anonymous donor. Everyone knows that story. Self-made success started from nothing. Yes. An anonymous angel investor who provided $200,000 in seed capital. Magnus smiled that terrible smile again. In exchange for a convertible note. Hunter frowned. What are you talking about? A convertible note. A form of short-term debt that converts to equity under certain conditions. Magnus clicked again. A scanned document appeared on screen. In this case, the note converts if the company goes public, or, he paused, in the event of a dissolution of marriage. The silence that followed was absolute. That's not true, Hunter whispered. I never signed anything like that. You did. Magnus zoomed in on a signature at the bottom of the document. Hunter's signature. Unmistakable. You were 24, desperate. You signed a stack of papers as thick as a phone book because you wanted the money and didn't want to wait. You didn't read page 45. Hunter was shaking his head. No. No, that's not who was the investor who holds this note. Magnus turned slowly. He looked at Leora. Then he bowed his head slightly like a man presenting a gift. Leora, he said gently. The note is in Leora's name. Hunter stared at his wife. She looked just as shocked as he was. Me, she whispered. Papa, I didn't have that kind of money. I was working at the library. I could barely make rent. You didn't have it. Magnus agreed. I did. He turned back to the courtroom, his voice carrying to every corner. 10 years ago, my daughter came to me. She told me she'd met a brilliant young man with a dream. A man she believed in. A man she loved. She asked me to help him. Magnus paused. But she made me promise never to tell him where the money came from. because his pride, his ego couldn't handle accepting help from his future wife's family. Hunter felt the floor tilting beneath him. I agreed on one condition. My lawyers drew up the convertible note. If you stayed married, if you honored your vows, the money was a gift. Free and clear. But if you ever filed for divorce... Magnus met Hunter's eyes. The debt comes due, with interest and equity. One of the associates clicked the remote. New numbers appeared on screen. Calculations, percentages. Based on the current valuation of Reynolds Tech and the terms of the convertible note which triggered upon the divorce filing, Leora doesn't just own half the marital assets. Magnus let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. She owns 60% of Reynolds Tech. She is the majority shareholder. He turned to Hunter. She is your boss, Mr. Reynolds. No. The word came out as a gasp. Hunter was gripping the table so hard, his fingers had gone numb. No, that's impossible. This is a trick. This is some kind of fraud. I'll sue. It's contract law. Judge O'Malley interrupted, studying the documents with wide eyes. And if that signature is verified as yours, Mr. Reynolds, this appears to be entirely binding. I'll dissolve the company. Hunter was screaming now, all pretense of control gone. I'll burn it to the ground before I let her take it. I wrote the code, I built it. It's mine. You can't. Magnus's voice cut through Hunter's hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I filed an emergency injunction. You've been removed as CEO pending a full forensic audit. Hunter laughed. It was a wild, desperate sound. An audit. What you think you'll find dust bunnies in the server room. I'm the genius behind that company. I wrote every line of code that matters. We're not auditing the code, Hunter. Magnus took one step closer, then another, until he was standing directly in front of the defense table, close enough that Hunter could see the silver threads in his tie. We're auditing the tax returns. Hunter stopped laughing. When my forensic accountants were tracking down your infidelity evidence, they found something else. Your other set of books. The real ones. The ones showing how you've been funneling company profits to the Cayman Islands for 6 years. That's standard business practice. Tax optimization. Every company. Tax fraud, Magnus corrected. Federal tax fraud. Wire fraud. And if my accountants found it in 48 hours, imagine what the IRS will find when they start looking. Donovan Price stood up abruptly. Hunter grabbed his arm. Where are you going? I'm withdrawing as counsel. Donovan pulled free, already backing toward the door. I can represent you in a divorce, Hunter. I can't represent you in federal criminal proceedings. You can't leave me. We have a contract. Sue me. Donovan was almost running now. You'll have plenty of time. From what I'm hearing, you'll have nothing but time. The courtroom door slammed shut behind him. Hunter stood alone. He looked at the judge, who was staring at him with unconcealed disgust. He looked at Magnus, who was watching him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. He looked at Leora. She was sitting up straight now. Her shoulders weren't hunched anymore. The woman who'd walked into this courtroom looking broken now looked like someone waking up from a very long sleep. 60%, she asked her father, wonder in her voice. 60%. And the house. Yours. Along with the cars, the boat, the vacation properties, and roughly $4 million in liquid assets after we subtract his expenditures on Ms. Miller. Leora nodded slowly, processing. Then she looked at Hunter. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I loved you, she finally said. When we got married, I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. You were so passionate, so driven. I believed in you when nobody else did. Leora, Hunter started. I gave you everything. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. My time, my energy, my father's money. 10 years of my life playing the supportive wife while you treated me like furniture. And you know what the worst part is? She stood up. I would have kept doing it, I would have stayed with you forever. I loved you that much." She shook her head slowly. "You didn't have to destroy me, Hunter. I was already yours. All you had to do was be kind." Hunter opened his mouth, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? Magnus placed a hand on Leora's shoulder. "Are you ready to leave, sweetheart?" She nodded, gathering the papers in front of her. "What about him?" Judge O'Malley asked, gesturing toward Hunter. "I assume you'll be pressing charges." Magnus paused at the door. He looked back at Hunter, at the ruined man standing alone at the defense table. His empire crumbling, his freedom, evaporating, his entire life collapsing around him. "The IRS and FBI have already been notified," Magnus said. "They'll handle the criminal matters. As for the civil case..." He glanced at Leora. "That's my daughter's decision." Leora looked at Hunter one last time. "I'm not going to pursue additional damages," she said quietly. "I'm not going to try to destroy you. I just want what's fair, what I earned, what I deserve." She turned toward the door. "And I want to never see you again." She walked out of the courtroom. Magnus followed his cane, marking each step like a final punctuation mark. The door closed behind them. Hunter stood in the silence, his $1,000 Italian suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. His phone buzzed, a text from Tiffany. "Just saw the news. TMZ already has the story. Don't contact me again." He dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor screen, cracking on impact. Judge O'Malley was gathering his papers. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you find new legal counsel immediately. This court will reconvene in 72 hours to finalize the asset division. I'd also suggest you don't leave the state. The FBI tends to frown on that." He banged his gavel one final time and disappeared into his chambers. Hunter stood alone in the empty courtroom. 20 minutes ago, he'd been a millionaire with a beautiful mistress and a clear path to freedom. Now he had nothing. No wife, no company, no money, no lawyer. And somewhere in the building, federal agents were probably already preparing paperwork with his name on it. He thought about calling someone, anyone, but there was no one left to call. He sank into his chair, put his head in his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, Hunter Reynolds had absolutely no idea what to do next. The air in the courtroom still smelled like floor wax and old desperation, but now it smelled like something else too. Justice. Hunter didn't know how long he sat there in the empty courtroom. Minutes, maybe hours. Time had stopped meaning anything the moment those oak doors swung open and Magnus Thorpe walked in. His phone kept buzzing. Notifications, alerts, messages from numbers he didn't recognize. He couldn't bring himself to look. Finally, the bailiff cleared his throat from the doorway. "Sir, the courthouse is closing. You need to leave." Hunter stood on legs that felt like rubber. He walked out through the back entrance, avoiding the lobby where reporters had already gathered like vultures circling a carcass. The afternoon sun hit him like an accusation. Too bright. Too normal. The world was going on like nothing had happened, like his entire existence hadn't just been dismantled in front of a live audience. He reached for his car keys before remembering Tiffany had the car. Tiffany, who was probably already halfway to her sister's place in San Diego with every gift he'd ever given her. Hunter called an Uber. The driver recognized him. Of course he did. TMZ worked fast. "Hey, aren't you that tech guy, the one who..." "Just drive." The ride to Reynolds Tech headquarters took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of Hunter staring at his cracked phone screen, watching his life implode in real time across every social media platform. #Reynolds scandal was trending. Someone had already created a meme of his face photoshopped onto a sinking ship. His mother had texted 17 times. He didn't open a single message. When the car pulled up in front of the gleaming glass tower that bore his name, Hunter felt a surge of desperate hope. This was his building, his company, his code running on servers he'd installed himself. Magnus could waive all the legal documents he wanted, but this was real. This was tangible. This was his. He pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was quiet. Too quiet for 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. "Mr. Reynolds." Hunter spun around. The security guard wasn't Jerry, the friendly older man who always asked about Hunter's golf game. This was someone new. Younger. Bigger. Ex-military by the look of him, with shoulders like a refrigerator and eyes that gave away nothing. "I'm in a hurry." Hunter was already moving toward the elevators. "I need to get to the 40th floor." The guard stepped into his path. "I can't let you do that, sir." "Excuse me." Hunter felt his blood pressure spike. "Do you know who I am?" "My name is literally on this building." "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Reynolds." The guard didn't move. "As of 12:30 this afternoon, the board of directors placed you on administrative leave pending investigation. Your access has been revoked." "The board?" Hunter laughed incredulously. "I am the board. The other members are my golf buddies. They wouldn't—" "Actually, they would." The voice came from above. Hunter looked up. Kevin Park, his IT director. The quiet Korean kid he'd hired fresh out of Stanford 6 years ago was leaning over the mezzanine railing. But Kevin didn't look quiet today. He looked relieved, almost happy. "Kevin." Hunter's voice echoed off the marble. "Tell this gorilla to let me up. I need to access the servers." "I can't do that, Hunter." "What do you mean you can't? I pay your salary." "You underpaid me for 6 years." Kevin's voice carried down clearly. "You took credit for my encryption algorithms. You called me the computer kid in front of investors like I was some kind of mascot." Hunter felt the ground shifting beneath him again. "Kevin, whatever you think happened." "I know what happened. I was there." Kevin straightened up. "Leora called me an hour ago. She offered me a 20% raise and 2% equity to secure the servers and lock you out." The words hit Hunter like physical blows. "You traitor! You ungrateful little—" She also apologized for how you treated me at the company Christmas party last year. "Remember that, Hunter? When you made jokes about my accent in front of the whole executive team?" Kevin's voice hardened. "Leora pulled me aside afterward and told me she was sorry. She was embarrassed. That's more human decency than you showed me in 6 years." Hunter was shaking. Rage, fear, disbelief, all of it churning inside him like a storm. "I need my personal belongings, my medication. You can't legally keep me from—" "Your personal items will be boxed and sent to your home address." Kevin was already turning away. "Or whatever address you end up at. I hear federal housing is pretty basic." He disappeared from the railing. Hunter lunged toward the elevators. The security guard caught him easily, twisting his arm behind his back and pinning him against the marble reception desk. Hunter's cheek pressed against the cold stone. He could see his own reflection, distorted, red-faced, pathetic. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to leave the premises peacefully." "Get your hands off me, I'll sue. I'll have your job. Let him go." The voice came from the entrance. Hunter knew that voice. He'd been hearing it in his nightmares for the past 4 hours. Magnus Thorpe walked through the revolving doors, his cane marking each step. Behind him came Leora and 2 men in navy blue windbreakers. The windbreakers had yellow letters on the back. FBI. Hunter stopped struggling. The security guard released him slowly, stepping back to a respectful distance. "Hello, Hunter?" Magnus stopped 10 feet away. "I thought we might find you here." "This is harassment." Hunter's voice was hoarse. "I have rights. You can't just—" "You have the right to remain silent." One of the FBI agents stepped forward, a woman with steel-gray hair and glasses that made her look like a strict librarian. "I'd suggest you exercise it." "I want a lawyer." "You'll have plenty of time to arrange that." The agent pulled out a folded document. "We have a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices and physical records located on the 40th floor, specifically relating to Chimera Holdings and Blue Wave Consultants." Hunter felt his knees buckle. They knew the names. The shell companies. The ones he'd created specifically to hide money from the IRS. How? He whispered, looking at Magnus. Those files were encrypted. Military-grade encryption. Nobody has the key but me. Magnus smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was worse than that. It was the smile of a man who had already seen the end of the story and found it predictable. When you first started the company, you used to work out of the garage at our house. Remember those early days when you were still pretending to be humble? You left your notebooks lying around. You left your computers logged in. That was 10 years ago. And you have a habit. Magnus leaned on his cane. A habit of using passwords based on things you think belong to you. Your first password was your car's license plate. Your second was your first office address. Hunter felt sick. I told my forensic team to try Tiffany. That's not... You're right, it wasn't. But then I thought, no, you're too narcissistic for that. So we tried Hunter 1. And what do you know? Magnus shook his head slowly. It opened the first firewall. The rest was child's play. Hunter looked around desperately. Employees had gathered on the mezzanine watching the scene unfold. People he'd hired. People he'd yelled at. People whose names he'd never bothered to learn. Some of them were holding up phones. Recording. He was going viral again. But not the way he'd always dreamed. Leora. Hunter turned to his wife. Ex-wife. Whatever she was now. Leora, please. You don't have to do this. We can work something out. I'll sign whatever you want. The house, the money, everything. Just call off the dogs. Leora looked at him. For a moment, Hunter thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Hesitation. Memory. The ghost of the love she'd once felt. Then it was gone. I spent 10 years calling off dogs for you, Hunter. Smoothing over the insults you made to investors. Apologizing to waiters you belittled. Explaining to our friends why you were always too important to show up. She took a step closer. I ironed your shirts at midnight because you needed to look perfect. I balanced our checkbook while you bought sports cars. I made you look like a king while I played the maid. Her voice didn't waver. I'm done, Hunter. I'm done protecting you from yourself. She turned to the FBI agent. He's all yours. Hunter felt the handcuffs close around his wrists before he even registered the agent moving. Cold steel. Final. The weight of them was nothing compared to the weight settling in his chest. Hunter Reynolds, you're under arrest for federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. The words blurred together. Hunter was watching Leora. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was walking toward the elevators flanked by Magnus and Kevin. The IT director was holding the elevator doors open for her like she was already the CEO. Maybe she was. Leora, Hunter shouted. Leora, look at me. You can't do this. I made you. She didn't turn around. The elevator doors closed. Hunter thrashed against the agents holding him. This is my building, my company. My name is on the door. Not for long. The female agent tightened her grip. We'll be seizing the corporate records as part of the investigation, including the naming rights. They marched him toward the exit. The revolving doors seemed smaller now, suffocating. Hunter could see camera flashes outside, reporters pressed against the glass like sharks against an aquarium wall. Any final words for the press? Mr. Reynolds? Hunter didn't answer. What could he possibly say? They pushed through the doors and into the chaos. Microphones shoved in his face. Questions screamed from every direction. Mr. Reynolds, did you steal from your wife? Hunter, is it true you're facing 20 years? How do you respond to allegations that you committed perjury? Hunter kept his head down. He let them drag him toward the waiting black SUV, its lights flashing red and blue against the glass tower that still bore his name. For now. The car door opened. They pushed him inside. Through the tinted window, Hunter watched his building shrink as they pulled away. The sun was setting behind it, turning the glass orange and gold. It looked beautiful. It looked like everything he'd ever wanted. It looked like goodbye. The FBI field office smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. Hunter sat in an interrogation room for 3 hours before anyone came to talk to him. 3 hours of flickering fluorescent lights. 3 hours of his own reflection in the two-way mirror, disheveled, desperate, defeated. When the door finally opened, it wasn't an agent. It was a man in a rumpled suit with a briefcase that had seen better decades. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Gerald Hoffman, Public Defender's Office." Hunter laughed. It came out sounding like a sob. "A public defender. That's what I get. I used to pay lawyers $1,000 an hour." "Well, sir, your accounts have been frozen pending investigation. And from what I understand, the half-dozen attorneys you called have all declined to represent you." Hoffman sat down across from him, opening his briefcase. "Something about conflict of interest. And bad publicity." "Donovan," Hunter muttered. "Donovan Price was supposed to." "Mr. Price sent a formal letter withdrawing from all cases associated with you. He also issued a statement to the press distancing his firm from any knowledge of improper evidence handling." Hunter closed his eyes. Everyone, every single person he'd ever trusted, ever paid, ever thought he owned, they were all running. "What are the charges?" Hoffman flipped through his papers. Tax evasion, wire fraud, bank fraud, perjury, obstruction of justice. And they're still investigating, so there may be more. "What's the exposure?" Hoffman looked up. His eyes were tired, but not unkind. "Worst case 25 to 30 years. The number hung in the air. Hunter Reynolds was 32 years old. If he got the maximum sentence, he'd be 60 when he got out. An old man, forgotten, irrelevant. Everything he'd built, everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd stolen and schemed and lied for, gone. "There might be options," Hoffman said carefully. "If you cooperate. Give up the offshore accounts. Help them trace the money. They might reduce the charges." "Cooperate?" Hunter tasted the word. It was bitter. "You mean confess? You mean admit I'm guilty?" "Are you guilty, Mr. Reynolds?" Hunter didn't answer. He thought about the last 10 years. The shortcuts. The lies. The way he'd looked at Leora like she was a possession instead of a person. The way he'd treated everyone around him like they existed only to serve his ambition. Was he guilty? He was guilty of so much more than the FBI would ever charge him with. "I need to make a phone call." Hoffman slid his phone across the table. Hunter stared at it. Who was left to call? His lawyers had abandoned him. His mistress had blocked his number. His employees were probably celebrating. He dialed the only number he could think of. It rang 4 times. "Hello?" His mother's voice. Tired. Worried. She'd probably been watching the news for hours. "Mom." "Hunter. Oh, thank God. Are you okay? I've been seeing the news as saying..." "It's true, Mom." Hunter's voice cracked. "All of it. It's all true." Silence. "What do you need me to do, sweetheart?" Hunter felt tears burning his eyes. After everything. After the lies, after the shame, after dragging the family name through the mud, she was still asking how she could help. "I don't know, Mom. I don't know anything anymore. Do you have a lawyer? Public defender?" He heard her sharp intake of breath. His mother knew what that meant. They'd grown up comfortable, not rich, but comfortable. Enough to know that public defenders were for people who had nothing left. "I'll make some calls. Your Uncle Robert knows people." "Mom, don't." Hunter wiped his face with his sleeve. The handcuffs clinked against the table. "Don't drag anyone else into this. It's my mess. I have to face it." Another silence. Longer this time. "Hunter, what happened to you?" The question was so simple, so sincere, it broke something inside him. What had happened to him? He thought about the hungry kid he'd been at 22, fresh out of college with big dreams and empty pockets. He'd been so desperate to prove himself, so desperate to be somebody. And somewhere along the way, becoming somebody had turned into becoming something else entirely. Something cruel, something hollow, something that could look at a woman who loved him and see only what she could give him. "I don't know, Mom." His voice was a whisper now. "I lost myself somewhere. And I didn't even notice until there was nothing left to find." "Hunter, I have to go. I love you, Mom." He hung up before she could respond. Hoffman was watching him with that same tired, knowing expression. First time really thinking about it. What? The consequences. Hoffman closed his briefcase. "In my experience, people like you, successful, powerful, untouchable, you never think about consequences. Until you're sitting in a room like this wearing handcuffs, wondering how it all went wrong." Hunter looked down at his hands. The platinum watch was gone. They'd taken it during processing. His wrists looked naked without it, smaller. "I was supposed to win," he said quietly. "I had it all figured out. The prenup, the evidence, the judge, everything. Nobody wins forever, Mr. Reynolds." "She was supposed to lose." Hunter couldn't stop the words. "Leora. She was supposed to walk out of that courtroom with nothing. I was supposed to fly to Cabo with my girlfriend and forget she ever existed." Hoffman stood up. "From what I've heard, Mr. Reynolds, your wife walked out of that courtroom with 60% of your company, $4 million in assets, and her dignity intact." He tucked his briefcase under his arm. "Sounds to me like she won, and you weren't even playing the same game." He knocked on the door. A guard opened it. "Get some sleep if you can. Arraignment is tomorrow morning. I'll do my best for you, but you should prepare yourself." "For what?" Hoffman looked back. His expression was almost sympathetic. "For the fact that the life you knew is over. Whatever comes next is going to be completely different. The question is whether you're going to let that break you or change you." He walked out. The door closed with a heavy clank. Hunter sat alone under the flickering lights, listening to the distant sounds of the police station phones ringing footsteps, someone crying in another room. He thought about Leora sitting at the head of the boardroom table. He thought about Magnus Thorpe's cold smile. He thought about all the people he'd stepped on during his climb to the top and how they were all watching him fall. The tears came then. Real tears. Not the performance he'd tried in the courtroom, begging Leora to call off the investigation. These were the tears of a man who'd finally run out of lies to tell himself. He cried until his throat was raw. He cried until there was nothing left. And somewhere in the emptiness that followed, Hunter Reynolds began to understand, really understand, what he'd lost. Not the money, not the company, not even his freedom. He'd lost the person he could have been if he'd just chosen to be kind. The arraignment lasted 12 minutes to catalog every crime Hunter Reynolds had committed, 12 minutes to watch the judge's face shift from professional neutrality to barely concealed disgust, 12 minutes to hear his bail denied because the prosecution argued successfully that a man with offshore accounts and a private pilot's license was an obvious flight risk. Gerald Hoffman did his best, he really did. But even the public defender's voice carried the unmistakable tone of a man defending the indefensible. "Your Honor, my client has deep ties to this community. He founded a company that employs over 200 people. He has no prior criminal record. We respectfully request bail be set at denied." The judge didn't even let him finish. "Mr. Reynolds has demonstrated a pattern of deception, financial manipulation, and obstruction. The court has no confidence he would appear for trial if released. Remand to federal custody pending trial." The gavel fell. Hunter felt hands on his arms guiding him toward a side door. Through the haze of shock, he caught a glimpse of the gallery. His mother was there crying silently into a handkerchief. His brother Marcus, who he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, sat beside her with his jaw clenched. No one else came. Not a single friend. Not a single colleague. Not a single person from the hundreds of holiday parties and charity galas and corporate events where Hunter had pressed flesh and collected business cards like they were trophies. The courtroom door closed behind him. And just like that, Hunter Reynolds vanished from public life. The federal detention center was nothing like he'd imagined. In movies, prison was dramatic. Gangs and violence and corrupt guards. The reality was worse. The reality was beige walls and fluorescent lights and hours that stretched like taffy. The reality was a 6x8 cell with a toilet 3 feet from his bed. The reality was becoming a number instead of a name. Inmate 847293. That's who Hunter Reynolds was now. The first week was the hardest. Hunter couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leora's face in the courtroom. Not angry, not triumphant, just disappointed. Like he'd finally become exactly what she'd always feared he was. He saw Magnus Thorpe's smile, that patient, predatory smile of a man who knew how the story ended before Chapter 1. He saw Kevin leaning over the mezzanine railing, 6 years of humiliation finally finding its voice. He saw Tiffany's name on his phone screen, her final message burned into his memory. Don't contact me again. On the 8th day, he got a visitor. Hunter shuffled into the visiting room in his orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. He expected his mother, maybe his brother, maybe even Hoffman with more bad news about the case. It was none of them. Sitting on the other side of the plexiglass was Marcus Chen. It took Hunter a moment to place him. Then it clicked. Leora's brother. The one who'd given a toast at their wedding about how Hunter had stolen his little sister's heart. The one who'd sent Christmas cards every year that Hunter had never bothered to open. Hunter picked up the phone receiver with numb fingers. Marcus, I didn't expect... I'm not here for you. Marcus's voice was flat, controlled. But Hunter could see the anger burning behind his eyes. I'm here because Leora asked me to come. Leora sent you. She wanted to make sure you were okay. Can you believe that? Marcus shook his head slowly. After everything you did, after you tried to destroy her in court, after you lied about her being unfaithful, she still wanted to make sure you were surviving in here. Hunter couldn't speak. That's who my sister is, Hunter. That's who she's always been. Kind, thoughtful, concerned about other people, even when they don't deserve it. Marcus leaned forward. You had a decade with that woman. A decade. And you never once appreciated what you had. I know. Hunter's voice came out as a whisper. I know that now. Do you really... Marcus's composure cracked slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. Hunter wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself. But what was the point? Marcus was right. 3 weeks ago, if Magnus Thorpe hadn't walked through those courtroom doors, Hunter would be on a beach in Cabo right now. He wouldn't have spared Leora a second thought. How is she? Hunter asked instead. Really, not what she wants you to tell me. How is she really doing? Marcus studied him for a long moment. She's thriving. The word landed like a punch. The board unanimously voted her in as CEO last week. Stock price is up 15% since the news broke. Investors trust her. Employees respect her. It's like the company was just waiting for someone competent to take over. Hunter absorbed the blow silently. She's seeing someone. That one hurt more than everything else combined. Already. It's been 3 weeks, Hunter, and she was emotionally single for years before that. Marcus's voice softened slightly. He's an architect. Nice guy. Treats her like she matters. Takes her to dinner without checking his phone every 5 minutes. Hunter thought about all the dinners he'd sat through with Leora. All the times he'd been more interested in email than conversation. All the times she'd tried to connect, and he'd brushed her off because he had important things to handle. What could possibly have been more important than the woman who loved him tell her? Hunter started, then stopped. What could he possibly say, Tell her I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know words are cheap, but tell her I'm sorry for wasting her time, for making her feel small, for all of it. Marcus stood up. I'll tell her. But Hunter. He paused with his hand on the door. Sorry doesn't undo anything. It doesn't give her back the years she spent believing she wasn't good enough. It doesn't erase the humiliation of sitting in that courtroom while you tried to destroy her reputation with fabricated evidence. He opened the door. If you're really sorry, don't just say it. Become someone who deserves forgiveness, whether she ever gives it to you or not. He left. Hunter sat alone in the visiting room, staring at the empty chair on the other side of the glass. Become someone who deserves forgiveness. The words echoed in his head as the guard led him back to his cell. The trial took 4 months to begin and 3 weeks to conclude. Hunter watched it unfold like a spectator at his own execution. The prosecution presented evidence so overwhelming that even Hoffman's best efforts felt like throwing pebbles at a tank. Bank records, wire transfers, emails Hunter had thought were deleted. Testimony from accountants who'd suddenly developed consciences when federal agents came knocking. The Cayman accounts, the shell companies, the years of systematic fraud. It was all there. Every secret, every lie, every dollar he'd hidden from the IRS, from his investors, from his wife. The most damaging testimony came from someone Hunter never expected. Tiffany Miller. She walked into the courtroom on day 15 of the trial, wearing a conservative navy dress instead of the designer outfits Hunter had bought her. No jewelry, minimal makeup. She looked like a different person. The prosecution called her to the stand. Ms. Miller, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? Tiffany glanced at Hunter. For half a second, he thought he saw something like regret flicker across her face. Then it was gone. We were involved romantically for approximately 18 months. He paid for my apartment, my car, and my tuition at the Fashion Institute. Where did those funds come from? He told me it was from his personal accounts. Investment returns. I had no reason to question it. Did you ever witness Mr. Reynolds discussing his financial arrangements? Tiffany hesitated. Hunter's heart stopped. Once. About 6 months ago. He was on the phone late at night. He thought I was asleep. He was talking to someone about moving money to the islands before she gets suspicious. I assumed he meant his wife. The prosecution smiled. Did he say anything else during that conversation? He said, Tiffany took a breath. He said he was untouchable, that by the time anyone figured out what he'd done, he'd be divorced and living somewhere without extradition treaties. The jury wrote furiously in their notebooks. Hunter watched his future evaporate with every word. After Tiffany stepped down, his own lawyer leaned over and whispered the truth Hunter had been avoiding for months. We need to talk about a plea deal. No. Hunter, the evidence is overwhelming. If this goes to the jury, you're looking at 20 years minimum, maybe more. If we negotiate now, we might get it down to 12. 12 years. Hunter stared at the wood grain of the defense table. I'd be 44 when I got out. You'd still have a life to rebuild. It's better than the alternative. Hunter thought about Leora sitting in the CEO's office that used to be his. Thought about her having dinner with some architect who probably opened doors for her and asked about her day. Thought about Magnus Thorpe, wherever he was, probably not thinking about Hunter at all, because men like Magnus had already moved on to the next battle. Let me think about it. But there wasn't much to think about. The jury came back in 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Hunter stood motionless as the foreman read the verdicts. Guilty. 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 The word repeated like a drumbeat, each repetition driving the nail deeper. When it was over, the judge set sentencing for 30 days out. Hunter's mother collapsed in the gallery. His brother caught her shooting Hunter a look that contained grief, anger, and something worse, the exhausted resignation of a family that had finally stopped hoping their prodigal son would change. The marshals led Hunter out through the side door. He didn't look back. What was the point? Sentencing day arrived with gray skies and the kind of drizzling rain that seemed personally insulting. Hunter shuffled into the courtroom for what he knew would be the last time. 4 months in federal detention had changed him. He'd lost weight. His hair had grown out, peppered now with gray he'd never noticed before. His eyes had developed a permanent haunted quality that no amount of sleep could fix. The gallery was nearly empty. His mother sat in the front row, clutching a rosary. His brother sat beside her, stiff and silent. A few reporters occupied the back rows, notebooks ready. And in the third row alone sat Leora. Hunter froze when he saw her. She looked different. Not broken, not angry. She looked whole in a way she hadn't during the divorce proceedings. Like someone who'd finally set down a weight she'd been carrying for years. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Leora didn't look away, didn't flinch. She just held his gaze with an expression Hunter couldn't quite read. Not hatred, not love. Something more complicated. Understanding maybe, or closure. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The ritual of justice playing out for the 1,000th time in this room with its polished wood and heavy symbolism. Mr. Reynolds, you've been found guilty of 17 federal charges, including tax evasion, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Before I pronounce sentence, do you have anything to say? Hoffman had prepared a statement for him. 2 pages of apologetic language designed to sound remorseful without admitting more than necessary. Legally prudent. Emotionally hollow. Hunter had memorized it. He didn't use it. Your Honor. His voice was hoarse from disuse. I could stand here and apologize. I could say, I'm sorry for what I did. And I am sorry. But I've learned that apologies without change are just words. And I've spent my whole life using words to manipulate people. He took a breath. I lied to investors. I lied to my employees. I lied to the IRS. His voice cracked slightly. I lied to my wife. Not once. Not twice. Every single day for 10 years. I looked at a woman who loved me unconditionally, and I decided she was less important than money. Less important than success. Less important than my own ego. He could see Leora in his peripheral vision. She was very still. I'm not asking for mercy. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking for the chance to serve my sentence and come out the other side as someone different. Someone better. Someone who might actually deserve to exist in the same world as the people I hurt. He sat down. The courtroom was silent. The judge studied him for a long moment. Her face gave away nothing. Mr. Reynolds, in my 23 years on the bench, I've heard many statements from convicted defendants. Most of them are performances. Carefully crafted appeals to my sympathy designed by lawyers who know exactly which buttons to push. Hunter felt his stomach drop. Yours was not. The judge leaned forward. Whether that's genuine remorse or simply another manipulation, I cannot say. But I will note it for the record. She opened a folder. The federal sentencing guidelines for your offenses recommend 18 to 24 years. Given the scope of your crimes, the amount of money involved, and the deliberate nature of your deception, I am inclined to sentence you at the higher end of that range. Hunter closed his eyes. However, the judge's voice shifted slightly. I've also received letters from several individuals affected by your crimes. Most were from former employees and investors demanding maximum punishment. But there was one letter that gave me pause. She held up a single sheet of paper. This letter is from your ex-wife, Leora Thorpe. She writes that while she cannot forgive what you did to her personally, she believes that destroying another human being completely serves no one. She asks that I consider the possibility of redemption. Hunter turned to look at Leora. She met his eyes, just for a moment. Then she looked away. Based on all factors before me, I am sentencing you to 15 years in federal prison. With good behavior, you may be eligible for parole in 10. 15 years. Hunter did the math automatically. He'd be 47 when he got out. Middle-aged. His mother would be in her 80s. His brother's kids would be grown. The world would have moved on without him. Do you understand the sentence, Mr. Reynolds? Yes, Your Honor. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel fell one final time. The marshals approached to take him away. Hunter stood, his legs unsteady, his mind still processing the number. 15 years. Wait. The voice came from the gallery. Everyone turned. Leora was standing. She looked nervous, more nervous than Hunter had ever seen her, even during the worst days of the divorce. Your Honor, may I have one moment to speak to him? The judge hesitated, then nodded. 2 minutes. Supervised. Leora walked forward slowly. She stopped at the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor, close enough that Hunter could see the faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Leora, I don't. She held up her hand. I didn't come here to hear you apologize again. I came because I needed to see this. I needed to watch it end. For closure. Hunter nodded, unable to speak. I loved you, Hunter. Truly. Completely. For a long time I thought there was something wrong with me because you couldn't love me back the same way. I thought if I just tried harder, gave more, asked for less, eventually you'd see me. Her voice trembled but held steady. It took me losing everything to realize the problem was never me. It was you. Your inability to see anything beyond your own reflection. I know. Hunter's voice was barely a whisper. I know that now. Do you... Leora tilted her head. Do you really know, or is this just another performance, another version of Hunter Reynolds telling people what they want to hear? I don't know, he admitted. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if anything I feel is real, or if it's just the character I've been playing so long, I forgot there was supposed to be something underneath. Something shifted in Leora's expression. That might be the first honest thing you've ever said to me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. This is the address of a therapist. She specializes in narcissistic personality patterns and identity reconstruction. When you get out, if you're serious about changing, contact her. Hunter took the envelope with shaking hands. Why? He asked. Why help me after everything? Leora looked at him for a long moment. Because my father taught me that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. And holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. She stepped back. I'm not doing this for you, Hunter. I'm doing it so I can move on completely, so I can close this chapter and never think about it again. She turned to leave. Leora. She paused but didn't turn around. Thank you. For the letter to the judge. For this. For... Hunter struggled to find words that didn't sound hollow. For being who you are. I never deserved you. No. Leora looked back over her shoulder. You didn't. But maybe someday you'll deserve whoever comes next. She walked out of the courtroom. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Hunter stood there holding the envelope, watching the last trace of his old life disappear. The marshals took his arms, gently guiding him toward the side door. Time to go, Reynolds. Hunter nodded. He didn't resist, didn't complain, didn't try to bargain for one more minute. For the first time in his life, Hunter Reynolds went quietly. The transport van smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. Hunter sat handcuffed beside 3 other inmates, all of them heading to the same federal facility in Lompoc. Nobody talked. There was nothing to say. They were all men who'd run out of words, run out of excuses, run out of road. Through the small reinforced window, Hunter watched Los Angeles slide past. The towers of downtown, the billboards on Sunset, the endless rivers of traffic filled with people living their lives, making choices, becoming who they were going to become. He thought about the person he'd been 3 hours ago standing in that courtroom. He thought about the person he'd been a year ago smirking at his wife across a divorce hearing, certain he'd won. He thought about the person he might become in 15 years if he survived, if he tried, if he did the impossible work of dismantling himself and building something new from the wreckage. The van climbed into the hills, leaving the city behind. Hunter watched it shrink in the distance. The glass towers, the palm trees, the kingdom he'd built and lost. Goodbye, he thought. Not to Los Angeles, not to Reynolds Tech, not to the money or the power or the life he'd known. Goodbye to Hunter Reynolds. Whatever came next would have to be someone else, someone better, someone worthy of the second chance he didn't deserve. 8 years, 2,920 days of concrete walls and fluorescent lights, of meals eaten at assigned times and showers taken under watchful eyes, of letters that came less and less frequently until they stopped altogether. 8 years of becoming someone Hunter Reynolds didn't recognize. The morning of his release, he stood at the prison gates with a cardboard box containing everything he owned. A few books, some letters. The envelope Leora had given him at sentencing, worn soft from being read 1,000 times. The therapist's address was still legible. Hunter had written to Dr. Sarah Chen during his 3rd year inside. She'd written back. Then they'd corresponded monthly, her letters guiding him through the brutal work of dismantling the person he'd been and examining the wreckage. It hurt. God, it hurt. Every session, even the ones conducted through letters, felt like surgery without anesthesia. Cutting away the lies he'd told himself, the justifications, the elaborate mythology of Hunter Reynolds' self-made genius, when the truth was, he'd been a frightened boy pretending to be a titan. The prison gates opened. Hunter stepped through. The California sun hit him like a physical force. Too bright, too warm, too free. A bus station was half a mile down the road. He started walking. His mother had died in his 4th year. Heart attack. His brother had called with the news voice flat and distant. She never stopped believing you'd change, Marcus had said. I hope she was right, for her sake. Hunter had cried for 3 days. Not pretty dignified tears. Ugly animal sounds that made his cellmate request a transfer. The grief wasn't just for his mother, it was for all the moments he'd missed. All the Sunday dinners he'd skipped because he was too busy. All the phone calls he'd cut short. All the times she'd tried to tell him she was proud of him, and he'd brushed it off because her pride wasn't worth as much as a stranger's approval. He'd never gotten to say goodbye. He'd never gotten to show her he could be different. That loss carved a hole in Hunter that never fully healed. But in its own terrible way, it also became the foundation for everything that came after. His mother believed he could change. He owed it to her memory to try. The bus to Los Angeles took 4 hours. Hunter watched the landscape scroll past, trying to reconcile the world outside with the memories frozen in amber from 8 years ago. Everything looked the same, but felt completely different. Like returning to a childhood home and realizing the rooms were smaller than you remembered. He had $47 to his name, a halfway house address in Glendale, and a phone number for a man named Robert who ran a nonprofit that helped former inmates find work. Robert had written to Hunter in his 6th year after reading an article about the Reynolds case in a legal journal. Most white-collar criminals come out and try to rebuild their old lives, Robert had written. They don't understand that the old life is dead. The question is whether you're going to grieve it or grow from it. Hunter had written back. They'd corresponded for 2 years. Robert never promised anything. Never offered false hope. He just kept asking hard questions and expecting honest answers. The halfway house was a converted Victorian in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. Hunter's room was 8 by 10 with a single window that faced a brick wall. Smaller than his old closet. Smaller than his prison cell, actually. It was perfect. He didn't deserve better. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But that wasn't the point. The point was to keep moving forward one day at a time and let the results speak for themselves. Robert came to see him on the 3rd day. He was a heavy-set black man in his 60s, with kind eyes and hands that had clearly done manual labor. He shook Hunter's hand firmly and sat down on the room's only chair. "So you're the famous Hunter Reynolds?" "I don't think anyone's called me famous in a long time." "Infamous, then." Robert smiled. You ready to work? Yes. Good. Because I don't have patience for self-pity. I've got a warehouse in Burbank that needs someone to move boxes and manage inventory. $8 an hour. No benefits. No glamour. Interested. Hunter didn't hesitate. When do I start? Robert studied him for a long moment. Most guys in your position, they'd argue. Say they're overqualified. Ask about something more appropriate to their skills. I don't have skills anymore. Not the ones that matter. Hunter met Robert's eyes. I spent 40 years learning how to manipulate people and systems. I never learned how to actually contribute anything, how to be useful, how to help. He spread his hands. So teach me. Start from the beginning. I'll move boxes. I'll sweep floors. I'll do whatever it takes to become someone worth something. Robert nodded slowly. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late. He wasn't late. Not that day. Not any day for the next 3 years. Hunter moved boxes. He learned inventory management. He got promoted to shift supervisor, then floor manager, then operations director for the nonprofit's network of warehouses across Southern California. He never touched a computer except for work, never checked stock prices, never Googled his own name or Reynolds Tech or Leora Thorpe. He just worked. And slowly, painfully, he started to become human. On his 3rd anniversary of release, Hunter got a visitor at the warehouse. He was reviewing shipping manifests when one of the workers poked his head into the office. Boss, someone here to see you. Says he knows you. Hunter looked up. Magnus Thorpe stood in the doorway. He looked older. The hair was whiter, the lines deeper. But those flint chip eyes were exactly the same. Observing. Calculating. Seeing everything. Hunter's heart stopped. He hadn't seen Magnus since the courtroom. Hadn't heard from anyone connected to his old life. He'd assumed that chapter was permanently closed. Mr. Thorpe. Hunter stood slowly. I didn't expect. May I come in? Of course. Magnus entered his cane tapping against the concrete floor. He looked around the small, sparse office, metal desk, folding chair, a single photo on the wall, Hunter with his warehouse team at last year's company picnic. Humble surroundings. It's honest work. Hunter's voice was steady. That's more than I could say about anything I did before. Magnus nodded. He didn't sit down, just stood there studying Hunter like he was reassessing a calculation. I came to see for myself. See what? Whether you'd actually changed, or whether this was just another performance. Magnus tilted his head. I've been watching from a distance, checking in. Robert sends me reports. Hunter blinked. Robert works for you. Robert works for himself, but I fund his organization. Magnus almost smiled. I've funded a lot of organizations over the years. Most of the people they help don't know I'm involved. I prefer it that way. Hunter thought about Robert's letters, the hard questions, the refusal to offer easy answers. You've been testing me. Observing, Magnus corrected. There's a difference. He finally sat down, lowering himself into the folding chair with the careful movements of a man feeling his age. 3 years ago, I would have bet everything I had that you were beyond redemption. Another narcissist who'd serve his time, learn nothing, and spend the rest of his life convinced he was the victim. What about now? Magnus was quiet for a moment. Now, I think I might have been wrong. The words seemed to cost him something. I don't say that often, but the evidence suggests you've genuinely changed, not just your circumstances, your character. Hunter felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't even known was clenched. I'm still working on it, every day. That's exactly what someone who's actually changing would say. Magnus stood up. I have one more piece of information for you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a newspaper clipping. Handed it to Hunter. It was a wedding announcement. 2 years old. Leora Thorpe marries Daniel Okonkwo in intimate ceremony. There was a photo. Leora in a simple white dress, smiling wider than Hunter had ever seen. The man beside her, tall, handsome, radiating the kind of quiet confidence that came from actually being a decent person, was looking at her like she was the only thing in the universe that mattered. Hunter stared at the photo for a long time. "She's happy?" he finally asked. "Very. He's a good man. Better than you were." "I know." Hunter handed back the clipping. "I'm glad. I really am." Magnus studied him. "You mean that?" "I do." Hunter sat back down. "For a long time I told myself I wanted her to be happy. But that was a lie. I wanted her to be miserable without me, to realize what she'd lost, to regret leaving." He shook his head. "Now I just want her to have the life she deserves, with someone who sees her, really sees her, the way I never could." Magnus was silent. Then he did something Hunter had never seen before. He smiled. A real smile. Warm and genuine and utterly transforming. "Hunter, for what it's worth, I forgive you." The words hit Hunter like a physical blow. "What?" "I spent years hating you, planning your destruction, dismantling your life piece by piece because you hurt my daughter." Magnus leaned on his cane. "But hate is heavy, and I'm an old man who doesn't have time to carry unnecessary weight." He extended his hand. "I'll never trust you. I'll never invite you to Thanksgiving, but I can acknowledge that people can change, and holding on to anger when someone has genuinely transformed serves no one." Hunter stood and took his hand. The grip was firm, final, the closing of a chapter. "Thank you." Hunter's voice was rough. "I don't deserve it." "No, you don't." Magnus headed for the door. "But that's the thing about forgiveness. It's not about deserving. It's about letting go." He paused at the threshold. "My daughter is giving a speech next month, at the Women in Tech conference downtown. She won't know you're there. But I thought you might want to see what she's become." Hunter nodded. Magnus disappeared into the warehouse. Hunter stood alone in his small office, holding the space where forgiveness had just landed, trying to absorb a grace he'd done nothing to earn. The conference center was packed. Hunter sat in the back row, wearing clothes from Goodwill that cost less than the pocket square he used to wear to board meetings. He was invisible here. Just another face in a sea of strangers. The stage was enormous. Screens displayed the conference logo, "Leading Forward Women Reshaping Technology." And then she walked out. Leora Thorpe. No, Leora Okonkwo, now according to the program. She'd taken her husband's name. A choice that felt right somehow. Like she was finally free of the past. She looked magnificent. Not in the way Hunter used to define magnificence: expensive clothes, perfect hair, visible markers of status. She looked magnificent because she looked complete, comfortable in her own skin, radiating the kind of confidence that couldn't be bought or faked. The applause was thunderous. "Thank you." Leora's voice filled the auditorium. 11 years ago, I was sitting in a courtroom watching my life fall apart. I had no money, no job, and a husband who had spent a decade convincing me I was worthless. The room went silent. Today, I'm the CEO of a company worth $2 billion. We employ 3,000 people. We've donated $40 million to education initiatives for underserved communities. And last month, we opened our 100th coding academy for young women. Applause. But I'm not here to brag about numbers. I'm here to talk about something more important. Something I learned the hard way. She paused. Kindness is not weakness. Hunter felt the words pierce straight through him. For years I believed that being kind made me vulnerable, made me a target, made me the kind of person who could be used and discarded by anyone clever enough to see the opportunity. Leora gripped the podium. I was wrong. Kindness isn't weakness. Kindness is strength. It's the courage to see humanity in people who have shown you their worst. It's the decision to build people up instead of tearing them down. It's the belief that who you are matters more than what you achieve. Her voice wavered slightly. The man who tried to destroy me is out of prison now. I've heard he's changed, working an honest job, trying to become someone different. Hunter stopped breathing. I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust that transformation. But I've chosen to hope, because hope is an act of courage, and I refuse to let what he did to me turn me into someone who can't hope anymore. The audience erupted. Hunter sat frozen as thousands of people rose to their feet, applauding the woman he'd once dismissed as a librarian's daughter with nothing to offer. She was magnificent, and she was finally completely free of him. Hunter slipped out before the speech ended. He walked for hours through streets that had once felt like his kingdom, past buildings he used to own, past restaurants where he'd closed deals and celebrated victories that meant nothing now. The city looked the same. He was completely different. When he finally stopped walking, he was standing in front of a small community center in East LA. The sign read, Reynolds Foundation, Second Chances for Everyone. Hunter blinked. He walked inside. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? I'm looking for information about this organization. Oh, wonderful. She handed him a brochure. We provide job training, counseling, and support services for formerly incarcerated individuals. Founded in 2019 by Leora Okonkwo. Hunter stared at the brochure. There was a quote on the front. This foundation is named after someone who taught me that people can change, not because he deserves recognition, but because every person who walks through our doors deserves to know that their past doesn't have to define their future. She'd named it after him. Not to honor him, not to forgive him, but to transform the worst thing in her life into something that helped others. Hunter sat down on a bench outside the community center. For the first time in years, he let himself cry. Not tears of self-pity, not grief or regret. These were tears of wonder, at the woman Leora had become, at the grace she'd shown to a world that had given her every reason to be bitter, at the possibility that even the worst stories could somehow be redeemed. He sat there until the sun went down. Then Hunter Reynolds, the man who'd lost everything and discovered it was exactly what he needed, stood up, straightened his secondhand jacket, and walked back toward his small apartment, his honest job and the quiet life he was building one day at a time. Behind him, the community center lights flickered on. Inside, a young woman who'd just been released from prison was filling out her intake paperwork. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change. Because someone had taken the wreckage of their worst moments and built a bridge for others to cross. And that is the story of how Hunter Reynolds learned the hardest lesson of all. He walked into that courtroom believing he was untouchable. He believed his money could buy justice, his lawyers could bury truth, and his wife would crumble when he crushed her. But he forgot the oldest rule in the book: the quiet ones aren't weak. They're just waiting. And when they finally rise, they don't just win. They transform everything they touch. Hunter lost his fortune, lost his freedom, lost the only woman who ever truly loved him. But in that losing, he found something money could never buy: the chance to become someone worth being. Not everyone gets that chance. Fewer still take it. If this story moved, you hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. And remember, kindness isn't weakness. It never was. It's the strongest thing any of us will ever do. Until next time.